So here we are with Brother Phap Huu, and you're joining us not from Plum Village, France, which is where I asked you to come on this podcast, but from somewhere else. Looks like
From Toronto.
from Toronto. Why are you in Toronto?
This is where I grew up. This is my childhood place. My family immigrated to Canada in 1990, and Toronto has been my base, my family's base until I moved to Plum Village.
Wonderful. Well, I hope that today we can talk a bit about why you moved to Plum Village and uh, you as an individual, but also what I asked you to come on this podcast for is really to help us, especially those of us that are struggling with stress and uncertainty and worry and overwhelm. And a lot of the practices that I've learned from Plum Village and from the teachings of Thich Nhat Hanh have really helped me with that. So I'm really excited to have you here to spread some of these messages. It's such an honor to be with you. Maybe we can begin with that. How you made it from Canada to become a monk in France.
I would have to give my gratitude to my father. Um, he was a boat person, a refugee from Vietnam. After the war ended, my father realized the conditions in Vietnam was changing, politically as well as the situation of the country. There was a lot of suffering, a lot of poverty, and the opportunities didn't look so bright. And at that particular time, there were a lot of folks um, gambling with their life in a way to have a brighter future. And this is when he had a family. So I wasn't born yet, but my sister was already born. So his life wasn't his life anymore, and he was thinking about the family. So he made the decision with a lot of courage to leave Vietnam as a boat person and just go into the ocean, um, and wish for the best. And the first time he was caught, so he was in prison for 2 years. And in the prison, he met many folks. At that time, there was criminals, but there were also very spiritual people also in prison, those who didn't believe in the regime that was changing were also in prison. So he had a broader opening of life, of the views, and he also met a lot of suffering. And he shared with me that was when um, we call it the beginner's mind, the seed that wants to understand um, that there is more to suffering. There is a path that can offer happiness. That's when it awoken in him. And he finally made it to Canada in 1989. And after 1 year, he was able to sponsor my family over. And at this time, I haven't met my father yet. So I was conceived, and then I was born in Vietnam. So it was the first encounter. So it was a really big moment for the whole family. And after him arriving in Canada, he was able to finally relax. The fight and the fear and survival mode was able um, to be put to stop. And so he realized he needed to look for some healing. And he remembered one of his teachers in Vietnam. In Vietnam, many villages have temples, so it's very normal to have a monastic that is a refuge for many people. So that teacher told my father, if he ever makes it to the West, look out for the name Zen Master Thich Nhat Hanh. And all the conditions came together in 1991. Thai and Sister Chung Kong. Thai is Zen Master Thich Nhat Hanh. And for us, his student, we call him as Thai, which means teacher. So throughout this podcast, whenever I call my teacher Tai. It means I'm referring to Zen Master Thich Nhat Hanh. So Tai and Sister Chung Kong were in Toronto, and Tai led a day of mindfulness and gave a public talk. And through that Dharma talk, my father realized he needed to take care of himself. So he saved up enough money, flew all the way to Plum Village, France, and he stayed there for a good 5 to 6 months. And that was his journey of healing and his journey of spirituality, which later on became our journey. 1996, I was 9 years old. My sister was 11 years old. My mother went back to Vietnam because she wanted to visit her family. And we have never been to France. So my dad really hyped it up. Said, we're going to go to Paris. We're going to see the beauty of France, which we did, which was only 2 days. And then we went on a train, traveled all the way to the south of France. And I started to see the countryside of France, which was very beautiful, very different than Toronto, the sunflowers, the hills. And this was the beginning of the journey. And I remember arriving at Saint Foy Le Grand train station, being greeted by a monk. That encounter blew my mind because the monk was very young. Um, the monk was very graceful in his actions. And I remember the bow that he offered to my family. And that bow was so genuine. It wasn't mechanic. It wasn't like, I just have to do this, but it was a bow of presence. And I was only 9 years old, and I just felt like I'm offered this respect. And so naturally, we just joined a palm and bowed back. And that year for the summer retreat, as you know, and as you shared in the podcast, it is very international. We get to meet so many folks from different walks of life. And I was introduced to a new Buddhism, a Buddhism that didn't feel Buddhist, according to my own experience from traditional temple. And I had the privilege of being in the presence of Tai when he was still teaching and still very healthy. And I didn't understand his teachings profoundly, deeply, but his way of being really left an impression. And I just remembered, because I didn't have the notion this is a famous monk, I just said, whoa, this is peace. And I left Plum Village with the impression that that is one of the safest place on earth. And we all, as a human being, we have a spiritual dimension in us. And it doesn't have to be religious. We don't have to belong to a religion. And for us, a spiritual side or a spiritual refuge, that's how we call it, it's not outside of us, it's inside of us. It's because we want to be able to touch our inner peace, our inner well-being, our inner silence, our inner happiness. And that means we have to have space and time to just learn to come back to oneself. And as I kept coming back to Plum Village with my family every few summers, I started to recognize that spiritual seed in me was becoming so big that it was knocking on the door of monastichood. And I was very young. I was only 13 years old when this thought manifested. It freaked my mom out because the concept of me living all the way in France and not being in Canada and being away from the family was a very scary thought for any mother, and I totally understand. But my mother understood how profound the impact of Plum Village has done to me. And so my journey really began in 2001 when I was 13 years old. And the monks and nuns were so excited. Even Tai was so excited to have teenagers coming in with the aspiration to devote their whole life to a monastic life, which is a life of practice, a life of transformation, and a life of service, which is the model of engaged Buddhism that our teacher has coined and has created. And now I call it a lineage, a tradition.
Thank you for that beautiful story. And as you were telling it, a lot of things came, images and thoughts came to mind for me. One is thinking of you as a 9-year-old boy, and how touched he was, and what you described of when you're around somebody that's in that space of peacefulness and kindness, how contagious it is. I have a 9-year-old son, and he felt that way at Plum Village. And today I'm actually going to be asking you some questions from him. I asked him to share his questions for Brother Phap Huu with me, and I'll ask one at the beginning and then one at the end. But the other thing that came to mind for me before I ask his question is that many of us may be thinking, okay, I just need to go to Plum Village and then I'll be happy. This is what I think now. If I just go to Plum Village, then I can be happy. But I don't live in Plum Village. I live in Santa Barbara, California, and there's stressors and beautiful things about living here. So I also want to talk today about how our happiness is here and now, or the things that we can do in the here and now, wherever we are, even if we aren't in Plum Village, to cultivate some of the peace and the strength and the solidity that you are talking about.
That's also a question I always ask myself. We say we have koans. They're like questions that are our journey. We always reflect on it. Like, what does happiness means? We think happiness is something that arrives when we achieve something. That is the day to day thought on happiness. Is like, I am doing something in order to achieve something, and then happiness will arrive. So this is a perception. This is still in the realm of our views. And what I have learned in my practice is that happiness is not is not at that destination only, but happiness can be a part of every journey, and it can be a part of the journey in every step, every action. And this can allow you to live deeper the present moment, because our practice of mindfulness in our tradition is to learn to be more at home in oneself, so that we can be in the present moment where life is. The present moment is the address of life. The present moment carries the past, it carries the future, it carries all of our suffering, and it also carries all of the conditions that can offer us happiness. Means happiness can be here and now. When I wake up every morning, I wake up and I can smile to life and I say, I have 24 brand new hours. How will I live this 24 brand new hours? That is mindfulness. This is enlightenment of life. This is happiness of life. And then our practice is we learn to smile to the 24 brand new hours, even if I know that 24 hours may be challenging. But my first intention is that I want to smile to that 24 brand new hours, because it is offering me an opportunity to invest and to cultivate my mindfulness, my awareness, to cultivate my love, to cultivate my relationships, to cultivate my way of being. And at the same time, I can smile to my suffering. You may think that monks and nuns, we don't have suffering, and once we enter into the monastic world, we're always smiling, we're always peaceful. That is not reality. That is not the truth. We have a lot of suffering that we are taking care of, that we are um, looking deeply into. But what we have is we also know the practice of patience, and we also know the practice of developing and cultivating our happiness in order to have enough well-being to look at our suffering. So when we talk about happiness, and whenever I talk about happiness, I always also reflect on suffering. For us in Buddhism, suffering and happiness are two pairs that go hand in hand. And this is one of the first noble truths of Buddhism, that suffering is always going to be present in life, but at the same time, happiness is also there. And suffering can be a teacher for us to understand about our own struggles, about our own journey, in order to arrive and to touch happiness. So I see that suffering is not an enemy, but suffering can become a condition that can help me deepen my my views, deepen my understanding, so I can have breakthroughs and have transformation, which will naturally offer happiness to me. So, happiness is also, looking at it this way, happiness is also the first noble truth, which is, if I'm alive, I know happy conditions are also there.
So let me play the first question for my son, and it's related to that because we all slept very deeply. I've never slept so deeply than at Plum Village. And when my children came back, they both had some sleep problems, and they continue to have sleep problems. And this is actually something that many of us struggle with, is sleep, because our sleep often can reflect what's happening in our life, right? So this was his first question. Actually, this was his third question. I'm saving the first question for last because it was a big one. But here is his question for you. Okay, sweetie, do you have any questions for Brother Phap Huu?
Yes. Sometimes I feel lonely in the night, and sometimes I feel like I can't fall asleep, and I try not thinking that because I know it'll keep me awake, but I just think about that, and I feel really lonely.
Mm-hmm.
Your question?
Mm-hmm.
Mm, wow, what a beautiful question, and I'm sure this question relates to many of us who also have trouble sleeping and loneliness. He touched on a suffering of today, of our modern suffering. So loneliness, when your son asks about loneliness, that is also a feeling. And so we always have to ask, what am I lonely of? Like, why am I feeling lonely? Where is this loneliness coming from? Because it is not just suddenly that loneliness manifests. There has to be there has to be ingredients for that feeling to be there. So next time that um, that feeling of loneliness come up, what I would do and what I would encourage is to recognize, my loneliness. Hello, my loneliness. I am here for you. And I will be that companion to to take care and embrace that seed of loneliness. And loneliness is not something to be ashamed of. It is just one of our many mental formations that we have as a human being. And when a feeling that comes up that is uncomfortable, sometimes we like to suppress it, we like to forget about it. But our practice of mindfulness is also to be mindful of what is happening inside of us. So when that sensation, that feeling is there, instead of trying to cover it up, maybe we might like to listen to music, or we may find something to do, watch a film or play some video games or eat some food. They are all instant fix, right? They are quick fix to the sensation, to the feeling, but they are not the transformation. They are not the practice that will lead to the healing. And so when we can smile to the loneliness, and we can uh, breathe with it, call it by its name, and embrace it, that loneliness will disappear because suddenly you are there for that loneliness. And I had a mentor, and in the monastery, when we're novice, through our novice years and our early years of a fully ordained monk, which is after 3 years, 5 more years we have, so 8 years of mentorship. And um, one of my mentors, he shared with us the practice of hugging oneself. So in Plum Village, we have a practice of hugging meditation, which we practice to truly be present for the ones who is there, and we would hug them with 3 breaths. So before we hug, we would join our palms, and in our practice, when we join the palm, it represents the body and mind coming together into oneness, because we want to be truly present for the ones that we are bowing to. And then we would embrace that person. And it's not just a pat on the back, pat, 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 and we're done. But when we embrace that person, we would breathe 3 deep in breath and out breath. And each breath, we have a contemplation. The first breath, we would say in our own self, I am here for you, right? That becomes a powerful sentence. We call it a mantra. And the second mantra, we would say, I know you are there and I am here for you. And the third one is to contemplate impermanence, which is, and I know one day all those that I love, I will also let go of, because that is the nature of reality, is that there is impermanence. And so in that hug, we touch not only our true presence, their true presence, and the nature of impermanence. So our gratitude becomes tenfold. Our happiness is increased. We don't take our loved ones, our friends for granted just with a hug. That is a practice. And you see, this doesn't belong in a doesn't have to only be practiced in a monastery. This can be practiced every day. We have a chance to see our loved ones every day. How do you see them? How do you enjoy a cup of tea with them? How do you embrace them? Are you embracing them just because it's formality, or are you embracing them because you are so nourished by their presence? And are we reflecting on the impermanent nature? And when you have that insight, all of our shortcomings and our little anger, frustration will dissipate really quickly, because there's so much more to life, right? And when you cannot sleep, we have the practice of total relaxation. And, we have a Plum Village app, which has a lot of guided meditation, and that can be a companion for us. But our own mindfulness is the companion which will always be with us. So learning to take care of the body is a true art, is a real art, and is a deep, deep training in our practice.
You mentioned about everybody that we love, we will let go of. Everything we love, we will let go of. And you were Thich Nhat Hanh's attendant for over a
Mm,
decade, and I'm sure love him deeply, and were with him when he had a stroke,
mm,
and watched him lose some things that he loved as well.
mm,
I'm wondering if you could share a bit about that experience with Thai and how that shaped you and influenced you, what you learned from it, and what was also transmitted to you from him.
mm. We have the 5 remembrance in Buddhism that is always taught to us. The first remembrance is, as a human being, I am of the nature to grow old. I cannot escape growing old. The second remembrance is, I am of the nature to grow ill. I cannot escape being ill. I cannot escape being sick. The third one is, I am of the nature to die. I cannot escape death. Um, the fourth one is, everyone that is dear to me or anything that is dear to me, one day I have to let go of. And the fifth one is my true continuation, my true legacy is my karma of body, speech, and mind, my three action of my body, my daily action, my speech, what I say, and my mind, my intention. And even though we recite this and we are reminded of these five remembrance, but when someone so profoundly impacted your life, I thought I was ready because I was like, oh, I'm a monk, I'm Zen, I know impermanence, we chant this every day. Um, and I was really naive like that, and I did forget a lot of the times being with Tai of that remembrance that we are of the nature to grow old. We are of the nature to have to let go of the ones that we hold so dear to us. And when our teacher was starting to get ill, which was in 2014, I have been with Tai for a long time, so I've seen Tai get sick, but he's always overcome it, and he's done it so gracefully, right? He's so mindful of his energy, and he knows how to rest. He knows how to take care of himself. So none of us expected a stroke, though. That was a surprise. It was very early in the morning, around 5 a.m. I received the phone call from the brother who's in the hospital room. Said, "Brother Phap Huu, something's happening. Tai is reacting in a way that I don't understand. Please come over." So at this time, we were in Bordeaux Hospital, and we were staying at a guest space for patient visitors. So we ran the whole attendant crew. We were around nine of us. We ran over. We were mindfully worry running over. One pointed mind to the hospital room. And when we arrived, I was holding tight, and it wasn't normal. Tai had to, that now looking back, the hemorrhage has already happened. And so Tai was looking at us with the eyes of, something just happened, please help. And I was really lost for words. And the only place that I dwelt in at that moment was my mindful breathing, because I don't know what to do. And maybe we are in the best place of help, which is the hospital. At this moment, it's just, I'm here for you, Tai. Yes, I was looking at Tai's eye, and I'm breathing, and I am bringing all of my presence to offer the energy of compassion, love, and healing to my teacher. But I will never forget the look of Tai when he looked at me asking for support. That look has penetrated really deeply in me, and it reminded me, no matter what, we're all human beings. We all need support. Even a Zen master like Thich Nhat Hanh, even the Buddha needed the support in his day and age. And so that was a very human moment with my teacher. And the anchor that I stayed with was my mindful breathing. Even all of the emotions that were coming up. And at that time, Tai entered into a coma, and Tai was breathing, and I can hear his breath. And feeling helpless, Tai has taught us, in any moment when you're helpless, your best friend is your mindful breathing. And because I can hear Tai breathe, so I was like, I'm gonna breathe with you, Tai. I don't know what to do, but if you're gonna go, I want to go and send you off as you're breathing, so that we're all mindfully breathing together. And I remember all of us attendant, we were um, around the bed and just breathing with Tai, and some were sobbing, some were embracing each other. And I just remember that. the the grief was present, but the grief was held by love. And that is what has allowed me to accept sadness, right? So I was grieving, and sometimes you have the thought, oh, you've been practicing for so long, you should be solid as a mountain. You should have conquered all your emotions, right? And then I understood that grief is also the meaning of love. I'm grieving because I loved my teacher so much. He has allowed me to walk a path of service, a path of beauty, a path of nonviolent, of peace. And the list can go on and on and on. But this was for me, this is love, right? So the tears that was flowing from my brothers and sisters were tears of deep gratitude. And miraculously, Tai survived the stroke, and Tai came out of the coma after 6 months. Um, we I went through a lot of mental discussion. I had the thought of like, the world is so unfair, and why does this have to happen to my teacher? And I went on this rabbit hole of all these thoughts, and every time I arrive there, I always am remember of the mindful walking. And there's a gata, it says, our minds can go in 10,000 direction, but on this lovely path, I walk with freedom, right? So, and I was like, I'm not free. This is the reality. I'm just creating more and more and more concepts, and I am making it worse and worse. So every time I went down this rabbit hole of complaining, I start to, okay, Phap Huu, just mindfully walk, take refuge in your steps. And then I start to be in touch with life again. I'm like, okay, the community is here. My teacher is still here. How can I support him? How can I live my life so that I can be a continuation for him? Because Tai has given me all of this practice, not to complain, but Tai has given me all this practice in order to take care of the emotions that I am going through, the suffering that I am facing. And what I learned from Tai coming out of the coma and being one with the condition that he was in, because after the stroke, our teacher couldn't speak and he was paralyzed on the right side. And the beauty of seeing him accept the situation that he is in was the deepest teaching for me. And this is present moment, wonderful moment. This is not a concept. This is not intellectually a philosophy. This was reality. Tai was practicing smiling to the paralyzed side, right? So we went through a whole process of trying to bring back as much movement in Tai's body. So it was such a journey, right? It was like seeing Tai be born again when we were trying to bring back feelings to his right hand. So all of his books was written by this right hand. And in a lot of talks, he speaks about it. And he always speaks about non-discrimination, where he asked, do you think the left hand is jealous of the right hand, right? And so he would go on this journey about how the two sides actually support each other. If the left hand actually gets hurt, the right hand will let go and come and just take care of it, just as its own hand. And this was a teaching of non discrimination, of how we all can be different, but when there is suffering, we know how to let go of our ego and to care for our other side just as we're caring for ourselves. And he always says, and the right hand never says, you know, left hand, I'm taking care of you, so you owe me one, right? There's none of that dialogue. It's so natural. So we can actually just learn from our own body how the body has the insight of love and tenderness. And so now Tai's right hand is not functioning, is paralyzed. And I just will never forget this moment of his tenderness he offered to his right hand. He mindfully looked at his right hand, and with his left hand, he started to place his left hand on his shoulders, right shoulders, and then his biceps, then his arm, the wrist, holding the fingers, and then placing the palm of the hand on his face. And I was witnessing my teacher embrace suffering so tenderly. And this is what I feel like what we're all missing. Whenever we face suffering, we want to fix it right away, and we can be actually very violent with it, right? We can be very violent with ourselves. Why aren't you working? Why aren't you the way it was in the past? And so this is again the cycle of suffering, of going back to the past, because we are so caught of how we were back then, and we want to be exactly like that. But we are of the nature of impermanence, so we're always changing. And so when I saw Tai take care of his paralyzed eyes like this, I said, this is no self. This is enlightenment. This is it. Like, Tai was free. And so I learned about the power of present moment. That everything that we're doing right here, right now is an impact to the past and is an impact to the future. Because sometimes I also take it for granted. I take my Plum Village life for granted. I said, oh, mindful breathing, that's so basic. But actually, that is foundational, that is fundamental. And where every time that I look back in my suffering, where did I always take refuge in? My breathing.
That was such
Mm.
a beautiful, beautiful story. And as you were talking, um, the imagery of Tai and his self compassion, and then his compassion, that sort of flow of compassion between you and himself and the greater community is very beautiful. And I have another question from my son that I want to make sure we answer, but I also um, brought in this little piece of wood that I brought back. The nuns write some of the gathas on wood. It may
Mm.
be backwards because I'm holding it up to the screen here, but this is a piece of wood that I picked up for many different reasons. One, to have in my office as a reminder. Two, this is the name of your podcast. The way out is in. And I have a
Yes.
bigger version of this in my office. But I'd love to discuss this concept of the way out is in,
Mm.
because many of us are feeling trapped. And part of what makes us maybe hurry up or get busy or do things is because we're trying to get out of these feelings
Mm.
that we're having. But Thich Nhat Hanh taught that the way out is in, and now you have a whole podcast around this title. So I'd love for you to share, and then I have one more question from my son before we wrap up.
Yes. I love this quote, the way out is in. This is my definition of meditation. So why is it the way out is in, right? We may think the way out is forward, the way out is through. But in Buddhism, our practice is always learning to transform our suffering in order to um, offer love, compassion, understanding, and happiness to the world. And our normal thought of life is we have to keep running and keep going towards something else outside of us, and that is that leads to happiness, that leads to success. And the world that we're living in offers so many things outside to run away from ourselves. So when we actually practice meditation, the first wing of meditation is learning to stop, learning to come home to oneself. Because we have such a habit of running towards the future. We have a habit of running away from our suffering. We have a habit of maybe even running towards an idea of happiness. And after we accomplish something, then we continue to run towards the next. So we're never satisfied. We never feel that we are enough. We never have the mindfulness of moderation, that this is more than enough condition to be happy. And so this has been transmitted to us, right, from generations to generation. And the second wing of meditation is looking deeply. And to look deeply, we have to have some quietness, some stillness to see things more clearly. And we always use the metaphor of a lake. When the lake is very still, it reflects everything very clearly. The trees that are around, the clouds. If there's a lot of clouds, it will identify the cloud as it is, right? So our mind is like that. If it is still, we will start to see our inner world very clearly. We start to see our habits more clearly, our negative habits and our positive habits. Then we get to see what it is that is making us suffer, right? Sometimes we we are full of emotions, but we never ask ourselves, why do I have this emotion? Where does it come from? And what is the way out of it? So this is meditation. And so in one of Thai's Dharma talk, and if you watch the documentary called A Cloud Never Dies, we put it in because it's so profound. He draws this circle, which it embodies no beginning, no end. It is a continuation, non the continuation of everything. And he draws an arrow inwards and he says, the way out is in. And he has this smile and he says, we all need to learn to come inwards in order to transform the suffering that we're trying to run away from. Because we have the perception that we need to take care of our suffering, but the suffering is somewhere outside of us. But in our teachings and in the Buddha's teachings, suffering is begins from inside, because of course there are conditions that are outside that can impact our suffering, but everything, the true transformation in our meditation begins from inside. So we have to come home to oneself, take care of ourselves, take care of our feelings, our emotions, take care of our stability, take care of our judgment, right? Can we be mindful of our mind, how toxic it can become, right? And it all begins from inwards. And once that transformation starts to happen inside, the outer world, we we can handle it and take care of the outer world with much more skillfulness and much more peace and non-violent. And when I say this, it doesn't mean that whatever happens outside, I accept. No, if something is wrong, I know it is wrong. If actions needs to be done, we will take action. But how do we do it? Right? There is a way to take care of a situation that can offer more discrimination, more violence, or it can offer more love, right? So this is like, I would say like this is the fruit of our teachers' practice during the Vietnam War, which was there was so much violence, so much suffering, and he went in and he said, "What is it that is needed now?" And that is safety, love, care. There's always a way to look at the suffering and how do we interact with that suffering. It has to begin inside. And we have a precept on anger. When we are angry, don't act on it. Don't say anything. Don't do anything. Come inward. That's why the way out is in. If you come inwards, You will embrace your anger, recognize your anger, take care of your anger, and then you take care of the situation with a different energy. And normally the outcome will be much better than when you take care of that situation with the energy of anger. Because anger is an energy, but we can transform that energy into a different energy.
Thank you. I'm going to ask you in a moment to lead us through a meditation to explore the way out is in, maybe, and
Mm-hmm.
we'll put that as a separate episode so folks
Mm,
can just go and use that meditation. And I will add that you offer meditations at the end of your talks on and your podcast of the way out is in, as well as you mentioning the Plum Village app that we listen to as a family, the total relaxation. And I use a lot of the meditations in the morning. There is so much there. So it is a way of bringing Plum Village to your home if you
mm.
have that desire to connect more with these teachings. I have one last question for you. And this comes from my son, and it's a big question. And I'm hoping that I can give you a really big question and then you can answer it with a very short answer.
I
So
will
that we have
try.
time, so that we have time for our meditation. Okay. So this is a challenge, but I think that actually Zen monks can take this challenge of taking something complex and simplifying it. Huh? So here it goes. This was actually his question that he asked me uh, 2 nights ago. And then I gave him an answer, but then I thought we should ask this of Brother Phap Huu. I think he probably has a better answer than I do. Okay. I don't know where this came from, but my son is a little, he's probably, he's a 9-year-old little Buddha. So here's his question.
Any more questions?
Yes. What is the point of life? Because you're born, you live, then you die.
Very good question.
Very profound. Very profound. I think we can end the podcast with that question. Very short. Did you say what is the meaning or what is the purpose?
What is the point of
What is the
life?
point?
Meaning and purpose, maybe. I don't know.
The Phap Huu today, this is his answer, and maybe 10 years from now will be different, but the point of life today is to offer unconditional love because love is a beautiful source of energy that allows us to be the best version of ourselves. And it's like the sun that nourishes this earth. When the flower is embraced by the unconditional source of the sun, it will always blossom. It will always bloom for us. So love is the point of life, and all of us have love in us. So please nourish your love so you can have an unconditional energy of love to offer to your loved ones, your mom, your dad, your brother, your sister, and then to all of us that is a part of this world. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. You are just a beautiful transmission of all the teachings that you embed with storytelling, which helps them come to life. And I really appreciate this time together. And I would love to, I can ring the bell if you would be willing,
Yes.
if you can do an impromptu 10-minuter. I will get my bell.